world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analyticaliowan podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
We are back here on the Analyticaliowan podcast. It is Saturday, November 8th, as you are listening to this. Now, full transparency, I am recording this podcast well after already having recorded a Rational Boomer podcast, as you may know, because a lot of you have found me because of the Rational Boomer. I guest over there quite often, and I did again, and that is going to actually air tomorrow. So I just got done recording a podcast for the future, and now I'm going to record the current podcast. I'm going to cover a lot of the same things in this episode that I am going to be covering in tomorrow's episode of the Rational Boomer, except I don't have Mike to play off of with this. You're just going to get my take on what is going on. Now, we got a lot to talk about. There have been some small changes in the way things are going with this government shutdown, and of course, with everything going on in the world of news and politics. So let's get into it. So what has changed with the government shutdown? Well, we are now in day 39 of this government shutdown. 4 days longer than the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. This is still the record held by Donald Trump. The longest record was also held by Donald Trump during his first term, when they could not get along and they could not pass a budget when they were in a similar position. They had the House, they had the Senate, they had the presidency, and they couldn't fund the government. Well, they can't do the same either, but they want Democrats to cave. So what changed? Well, Democrats offered an olive branch, probably the best deal they are going to ever offer Republicans in this government shutdown. And John Thune said it was a non-starter. And we don't even know what Mike Johnson is going to do with any sort of a deal that comes out of the Senate. So what was put on the table? Well, Chuck Schumer said on the floor of the Senate today that he had the votes to pass it. He knew if they brought it up, if they agreed to it, that it would pass. Basically, he would fund the government through January, and that basically they would agree to all of it in exchange for simply 1 year of Affordable Care Act credits. And Republicans said no. John Thune said that was a non-starter, that the only way they would open the government is if they fund it at current levels with promises to talk about it later. Seriously, John Thune, how much later is left? The year is over as today is the 8th. That means there are 53 days left in the year. 53. How much later is left? When do you want to fulfill that promise to discuss it later if they open the government, even if they did it today? When would you fulfill that promise? Next week? Well, then if you're just going to talk about it next week and they're only going to ask for 1 year, just do it now. Or are you going to wait till like June of next year after it's already been too late? They've already expired. People's health care has already gone through the roof. And, now you have to deal with that. You want the Affordable Care Act to fail because you want to be able to replace it. Well, you want to repeal it. You don't even want to replace it because you don't have anything to replace it with. When asked, a member of Congress, I don't remember which one it was a Republican, was asked, what is your plan to replace the Affordable Care Act? And the answer was come up with something better. They don't even have a full plan. They just want to get rid of it because they don't like Barack Obama. Obama was the one who got it through. And what we currently have has actually turned out to be wildly successful. They didn't like it then. They don't like it now, in part because remember how they treated Barack Obama? Senate Majority Leader at the time, Mitch McConnell, had said that they were going to do everything they could to make Barack Obama a one-term president. And they couldn't even do that. They tried to block everything that Barack Obama wanted to do. Mitch McConnell used to laugh that his desk was the place where legislation during the Obama administration went to die, because it could end up on his desk and he wouldn't bring it for a vote. So they want the Affordable Care Act to fail so they can get rid of it. They don't want to fund it, but they also don't have a plan to replace it with anything. They just want to go back to what it was pre-Affordable Care Act. And we've talked about that. Insurance companies who donate heavily to Republicans, they want to go back to being able to do whatever they want and make whatever kind of money they want. They're afraid of Democrats because Democrats, if they were smart, would get behind universal health care, Medicaid for all, whatever you want to call it, and insurance companies could be out of business. Insurance is not a winning strategy when it comes to managing healthcare, because the whole point of insurance is you are paying this company to cover it. You are paying them a fee, a premium, saying, okay, if I need to go to the doctor, I want you to cover a portion of my bills later for a little bit of money up front. Well, the only way they make money is if you never go to the doctor. Problem is, people go to the doctor and then they use the health care. Then they don't make as much money. So then they have to charge even more money in premiums, and it becomes a vicious cycle. And they are so caught up in doing whatever they can to not pay out any money. It's ridiculous. Some insurance companies own hospitals, which they shouldn't be allowed to do. They own doctors' offices, etc., so they can have a better direct control over what doctors actually do. And they have too large of a say in what healthcare is actually covered. And they want Republicans to give them a bigger say. Right now, insurance is kind of reined in with the Affordable Care Act. It needs tweaked. It needs fixed. There are plenty of issues with it that we need to address. But the insurance companies, and by extension now Republicans, because insurance companies donate to Republicans who want to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, do not want us to fix healthcare. They want to go back to being able to do whatever they want. Some of the things that used to happen before the Affordable Care Act changed anything is it used to be you turned 18, you were no longer allowed to be considered a dependent on your parents' health insurance. You couldn't. You had to. If you had a small enough plan, maybe you stayed on that insurance policy, sure, but they charged you a full price, like they were charging you for, say, like they would charge somebody for a spouse or something like that, not a child. They had to charge you. They charged you a different premium if that was something that happened, or you had to go out if you were 18 and go get your own insurance, or run the risk without it. And that could apply to college students, or, there are some people who don't graduate high school at 18, they graduate at 19. So you could still be a student in high school and not have health insurance. At least under the old rules. They wanted to be able to deny you things that you were born with necessarily. Say you were born with something that didn't get found until you were 5 or 6 years old. Under the old rules, they could call that a pre-existing condition and deny you. Same thing with when you switched employers. You were being treated for something. It used to be that insurance companies didn't have to cover you because they don't actually want to pay out any money to actually make sure you have health care. Insurance companies just want to make profit. And that's what Republicans want us to go back to, because they don't have a plan to replace the Affordable Care Act. It is just let insurance companies do whatever they want. Okay, so Democrats offered 1 year extension of the Affordable Care Act subsidies. 1 year. And it sounded like nothing else other than 1 year and funding the government through January, and I think certain sections of the government would get funded for a year. I think they were going to go along with that idea coming out of the Republican Party. And guess what? They shot it down. They didn't want to hear it. Said it's a non-starter. Okay. So where do we go from here? Well, Democrats just proved that Republicans own the shutdown, that they're not serious about negotiating, and they didn't even realize they walked into that trap. So now the pressure campaign is probably going to start in earnest from Democrats. Now, Donald Trump is down at Mar-a-Lago this weekend. He told Senate Republicans that they should stay in town and keep working. But then he leaves town. He goes to Mar-a-Lago, probably going to go golf, things like that. It's probably getting too cold for him in D.C. Got to go back someplace warmer. But they're going to be working over the weekend. It sounds like they have plans to actually be negotiating. Maybe they'll come up with something. But there's going to have to be some cracks forming in the Republican Party in order to get anywhere. And it's going to have to start by turning against some of the leadership. There's already cracks forming, though, when you look at how Senate Republicans are handling Donald Trump and his demand for getting rid of the filibuster. Now, they could get rid of the filibuster. The filibuster is that rule that requires 60 votes, a supermajority, to end up passing anything in the House. Well, basically, you have to end the debate and move it forward. Once you agree to end debate, you don't need 60 votes anymore to pass the legislation. You just, I believe, need a majority. It's just to get it to that point. Otherwise, debate effectively stays open. Well, Donald Trump wants that gone. He wants them to do it, move on, pass his bill, and pass this Republican resolution to get the government back open, because he wants the win, and he thinks it's going to make him look like a tough guy for not caving, and that's all he cares about is his appearance. Well, as they're dealing with it, Senate Republicans are saying, fuck you. We're not getting rid of the filibuster. Now, why wouldn't they want to get rid of the filibuster? Because they see the writing on the wall. They see what would happen. And not only that, I think it was House Speaker Mike Johnson who was talking about it, had said that with getting rid of the filibuster, if Republicans do it, sure, they win temporarily. But I think they know that their priorities are not a winning strategy right now with the American people, because they're talking about 26 and 28 having Democrats being in power. Well, if you're passing winning legislation and you're passing things that help everybody, you would think the voters would vote you back in. But they're worried about not getting voted back in. So must mean what they're going to do is not going to be good for the American people. But beyond that, when he was talking about it, one of the things they said is they could pass whatever they want. If the Democrats were in charge with the Democratic president, they could pass whatever they want, including statehood for Washington, D.C., and statehood for Puerto Rico. And they said when that happens, Republicans would never win again. Probably true. Both areas would vote heavily blue. I don't know how the House would shake out, depending on what they did with that, if they changed the number of representatives in the House when they added in 2 new states. Because right now it is capped at 435. But they could pass anything they wanted and maybe change the number to 535 or something like that and reproportion the entire country. But Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. would get a number of representatives based on population, and they would each get 2 senators. That would change the math in the Senate for anything getting through. But more than likely, all 4 would go Democrat. more than likely. And Republicans are scared that they would never have power again if that happens. That is just one of the things that they are worried about for getting rid of the filibuster. If they get rid of the filibuster, it is something Democrats could do. Would they? I have no idea, but it's something they could do. So, Senate Democrats offered their best possible plan. Okay, now we'll see if any sort of negotiations in earnest actually happen. Now, some people in the Senate were saying they could have a deal and the government could be open by as early as middle of next week. That'd be great. That'd be a good thing. Only if the Democrats get something out of this government shutdown. If they come out of this government shutdown with nothing, which I think they were worried in part that that is exactly what was going to happen. When I was talking to Mike, the Rational Boomer, on what will be tomorrow's Rational Boomer podcast, we were talking about the fact that some Senate Democrats were talking about caving on the government shutdown. Well, they won in the midterm, or they won in the off-year elections. They just had all that momentum that they proved their point. Maybe it's time to get out, to open the government back up and move forward. But by offering them this deal, this best case deal of 1 year of Affordable Care Act subsidies with promises to discuss longer term solutions and opening the government till January. All that does, and when Republicans didn't take it, it just proves that Republicans aren't serious about actually, opening the government or coming to a deal. Now, all Republicans keep saying about that is it's a non-starter, that they want to open the government first and then they will have those discussions. Well, right now, this is where Democrats have the power to force them to have the discussions. Once the government's open, there's no fire under their feet to actually do that. So I think this just proved to any of the holdouts that were thinking about wavering in the Democratic caucus that definitely the Republicans do not feel like negotiating at all, that they're not serious about opening the government. Okay, so yesterday we were supposed to have a payout to the SNAP program. We were supposed to have a full fund of a month's worth of SNAP benefits by the federal government because we had a judge in Rhode Island direct the Trump administration to fully fund the food stamp program and to move money around if they had to make it happen. Well, they appealed because of course they did. Donald Trump said in their court filings for the appeal, they did try to sugarcoat it a little bit and said, well, how are we supposed to fund it? We've already exhausted the emergency payout, because they are saying in court filings that they have already used the emergency money as of yesterday, that the emergency fund that would have paid about 55-60% of a month of food stamps for people, that they're saying that was already spent, that they had already released that money. But we had been hearing up until Thursday that they weren't going to release those funds. Donald Trump himself had been saying, well, the government needs to remain liquid. We need to have access to money, and all of these things. So which is it? Well, they filed in court that they have released the money. Now, hopefully they already have. We haven't heard very many reports from states saying that they have received any funds, though. This administration tried saying because it has to go through a different payment system and it has to do this and it has to do that it was going to take a while for the states to receive their money. But they filed this in court anyway, that they have released the emergency fund, and they were just trying to get basically relief from having to move the money around and finish paying the rest of that money out. But the simple fact that we are even talking about an administration who claims to want to help people, who claims to be working for the American people and trying to make things more affordable, because that is what they ran on. All we heard all campaign from Donald Trump was grocery prices, egg prices, gas prices. I'm going to lower your energy bill. I'm going to make things affordable. Oh, the Biden inflation is oh so bad. Well, when it comes time to do something about it, they're not doing anything about it. They want excuses as to why they're not able to fund food stamps. They have excuses. So they asked the First Circuit Court of Appeals to help them out here and give them some sort of relief and make it so they didn't have to fully fund SNAP. I think they were actually hoping that they wouldn't have had to fund SNAP at all, but the First Circuit Court of Appeals did not immediately get them a response. So what did this administration do? Did they fund the money? No. They appealed to the United States Supreme Court. Now, they appealed, and when you appeal from the appellate court to the U.S. Supreme Court, every justice oversees one or possibly two, because there are 13 appellate courts, 9 Supreme Court justices, that they oversee one or two lower courts. So they appealed to the Supreme Court on an emergency basis and said, hey, help us out here. Well, Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson did intervene on behalf of the Trump administration. Now, before you start typing in the comments how much you hate what she has done, hear me out. What she did put a stay on the lower court's ruling to force them to pay the full month's benefits, but not on the merits of the case. This wasn't. She didn't say that they won't have to do it at some point or whatever. All she said was, and she directed the First Circuit Court of Appeals to act quickly. She said, and I don't know how many days worth of a stay she put on there, but she put a temporary stay saying that because of what the lower court ruling was, which said they had till yesterday, which was Friday, to issue the full payment. The First Circuit Court of Appeals only had one day effectively, or even part of a day, to look at it and issue a ruling. She said they need a few more days. So she put a temporary restraining order on that. By the time you hear this, we may have gotten a ruling from the First Circuit Court of Appeals. On time-sensitive matters like this, it is not uncommon to get rulings on Saturday, sometimes even on a Sunday, if it is extremely time-sensitive. So she told them, act with quickness, act with dispatch, make it happen, and come up with a ruling here. But she understood that one day was way too quick for them to actually come up with a decision. And on that logic, I don't fault her. Okay, she wasn't looking at it saying, "Well, no, we don't need to feed people." She admitted we do, but she also said when you're answering a major legal question like this, you have to have a little bit of time to do all of it, because everything in the process takes a little bit of time. It does take time to do some research legally, because even though they are, smart when it comes to the law, and these judges know the law, sometimes they still have to look back and look at case law. They have to look things up. They have to, they have to even take time to write their opinion. And I know they don't always write their own opinions. They have clerks and staffers do it, but then they have to still proof it and, figure it out, dictate it, explain to the staffer what they want said. All of those steps take time. And that is what Ketanji Brown Jackson is saying here, that it takes a little bit of time, act quicker, but we need to give you more than a day. So I'm not going to take the all hope is lost with the Supreme Court route just yet, because this logic makes sense. Now, one of the things, again, that I discussed with Mike, the Rational Boomer, was that could she have been giving them this couple days to save it from going from the full court of the full Supreme Court, where the Republican leading justices, three of which that were appointed by uh, Donald Trump, where they may have given him some leeway, some flexibility, and actually sided with him and said, "Yeah, you know what? We're just gonna go ahead and say no, you don't got to pay that." Something like that. It's possible. So we're still waiting to see what's going to happen with the SNAP benefits. They should have already gone out. We shouldn't even have this discussion. And the fact that we are dealing with an administration who is trying to find legal ways to not pay out SNAP benefits is ridiculous. And they want you to believe that Republicans are the ones that want to feed people. But there's a problem with that. Democrats brought forward a measure that would fund the food stamp program through the government shutdown till they come to a deal. Okay? Guess what happened? They asked for unanimous consent in the Senate, and a Republican shot it down. It wasn't a Democrat, it was a Republican. So they couldn't even get that passed. They couldn't even pass something to feed people at this point. Now we have Christmas and Thanksgiving coming up, and people are going to want to eat. They need to eat anyway, but we've got major feasting holidays coming up where people are going to want to spend a little bit better money, get a little better meal for their loved ones, etc. And I can already hear the MAGAs in the comments saying, well, if you're on food stamps, you shouldn't be able to afford a big meal like that. Well, for a lot of cases, the meal itself isn't as expensive depending on what you do. Because, like, if you're just doing turkey, turkey is relatively cheap. It's not about the actual cost. It's about getting the ingredients and just even being able to afford getting the food itself. And maybe they scrimp a little bit and they eat some cheaper meals. Maybe they have nothing but ramen for a week to be able to afford to get the bigger meal. And if you cook it right, I know for a lot of the places, a lot of the years when I've done Thanksgiving dinner, I've had leftovers for days. And maybe that's part of the plan for some of these people is that, well, yeah, we're going to spend a little more money, but we're going to eat on it for 3 days. And we're going to stretch that meal out for quite a while. So they're going to have to come up with some solution here. And they're going to have to get the food stamps paid out. They're going to have to get people their benefits. But remember, it's not the Democrats that are holding everything up. It's Republicans. All of this could end up getting dealt with if Republicans would just actually negotiate. Democrats offered them an off-ramp. They said no. It was a non-starter. And now we are dealing with the fallout. One other thing with this Supreme Court case and this decision from Ketanji Brown Jackson, with her giving the lower court a few extra days to come to a ruling, the appellate court, it may not matter. Like I said, the Senate is there over the weekend. If they come up to some kind of a deal, they could end up opening the government back up and fully funding the STAT program, and it wouldn't matter. Now, I think any sort of funding plan for opening the government is going to also include, I would assume, that they are going to make sure that everybody gets a full payout for November, and they restock the emergency fund that was used, if it was illegitimately used, like the administration said in those court documents. All right. So beyond that, we have one of the other big issues going on right now, and that is with the House being gone, you have Representative Grijalva not being able to be sworn in. Mike Johnson has used every excuse in the book, and he has come up with every reason to not swear her in. And there's only one reason, realistically, why he doesn't want to bring her back or bring the House back and swear her in, and that has to do with the Epstein files. Now, there is a discharge petition on the floor of the House of Representatives. And if you don't know what a discharge petition is, effectively, a discharge petition will force a vote on anything. Any bill can be brought forward with a discharge petition. This would go around House leadership right now, which is Republican with them having the majority and Mike Johnson being Speaker. He doesn't want to bring this bill for the vote on the Epstein files to force the DOJ to release the files out for a vote. He doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to bring it out for a vote because he's afraid of actually going on record one way or the other when it comes to the Epstein files. Why? Well, I talk about it almost every day, but Donald Trump wants the Epstein files buried. He doesn't want to talk about what is going on in the files. He doesn't want the fact that he is probably, and we'll talk a little bit more in a minute about what is going on with him in the files, but he doesn't want that any of that brought to light. And there are probably some very powerful people in the Epstein files. Mike Johnson doesn't want that brought to light, in part because if they vote to release it, Donald Trump has already said anybody who votes in favor of releasing the files is hostile to Donald Trump and this administration. And he is threatening primary challengers. He is threatening all sorts of things against anybody who votes in favor of releasing it. But see, here's the other problem. Donald Trump ran when he was grasping at straws on trying to figure out something that would actually get him elected. He ran on a campaign of releasing the files. And now his voters expect it. MAGA wants the files released, but they want them released in part because they have been told for years, that there are nothing but Democrats and left-leaning people in the Epstein files. That it is going to be all left-leaning people, all Democrats, because they do these awful, awful things to children. Now, are there going to be some left-leaning people? Yes. And when there are, we want them brought to justice if possible. If it is within the statute of limitations, they should be charged for whatever they did. And if it is outside of the statute of limitations, but within any sort of statute of limitations for financial gain, where the victims can sue for damages, because some states have differing laws about when things are made public and when you could actually make a claim, etc. Maybe they can get some financial restitution that way, which doesn't make what happened to them any better, but at least it is something. Ultimately, we want to see whoever it is have their name be dragged through the mud and have them go down in infamy. I don't care who is on the list. I don't care if it's my favorite actor. I don't care if it is a politician. I don't care who it is. If they are on the list, we need to know who it is, and they need to go down as being an awful person in history. Period. Now, Mike Johnson doesn't want to have to come up with a way to explain to the voters that they're trying to not release the Epstein files by siding with Donald Trump on this. And if he sides with the voters to release the files, then they got to deal with Donald Trump being pissed. So his answer: we'll just keep the House of Representatives out. Now, there are a couple of ways this could end. Okay. Ultimately, another Republican could just come forward and sign the discharge petition. It could happen. And if that happens, he's got no reason to keep the House of Representatives out at that point. He would have to bring them back. He would bring them back anyway, swear in Representative Grijalva. She would sign it as well. They would hold a vote. And you would think anybody who signs the discharge petition is going to vote in favor of the measure to release the files. Now, even if it passes the House, this doesn't mean the Epstein files get fully released. This is just the first step. It would still have to go to the Senate, where it could get buried and nothing happens. And then from there, it has to go to Donald Trump's desk. And we know he won't sign it. I mean, unless somebody convinces him to, but I don't think he would ever sign that willingly, unless it passes with such overwhelming support that he knows they'll pass it around his veto anyway. So then, rather than get embarrassed and have something pass around his veto, maybe he would sign it. But this is about accountability and having names that they can go back to districts and say, hey, this representative, and I'm going to pick on Mike Johnson, that they can go back to his district in Louisiana and say, Mike Johnson voted to hide the Epstein files. Right here, here's the vote. He voted no on releasing them. And the Republicans don't want to deal with it. So how does this ultimately end? Well, ultimately, at some point, he is going to have to bring the House back into session. Their funding for the CR that they passed in the House initially, that he keeps saying is the only thing they will vote on, that CR actually expires in about 19 days. No, 13 days. 13 days, a little under 2 weeks. So they would have to come back anyway and vote on a new CR. Or the Senate might pass something. Maybe they come up with something this week over the weekend, and he has to bring the House back. Ultimately, he is going to have to vote on something. He's going to bring the House back, and when he does, it's going to trigger this discharge petition. He will have to swear in Representative Grijalva. Now, what else could happen? Another Republican could sign off on it because they're sick and tired of what is going on. But this doesn't bode well for Mike Johnson. Okay? I don't know that he survives maybe even the year as Speaker of the House. He's got multiple things hanging over his head about how he could lose the speakership. Now, if he brings the House back, Representative Grijalva signs the discharge petition, they hold a vote, and it passes. Donald Trump is going to be pissed that they didn't bury the Epstein files. Because right now, with the House continuing to be out and they're not there, even the Oversight Committee that was looking into the files is not there. They're not looking into it. They're not releasing anything. And Donald Trump has successfully weaseled out of any sort of accountability for himself or anybody around him in relationship to the Epstein files. Okay, so they come back into session. Mike Johnson unsuccessfully blocks an effort for this discharge petition. They hold the vote. Donald Trump could get pissed off, call somebody in Congress, call one of his hardcore MAGA supporters and says, get rid of him. It would only take, I think, 4, maybe 5 Republicans and all Democrats, and Mike Johnson's gone. He's out. Okay. But let's say Donald Trump figures he can still keep it buried because the Senate's going to save him on the Epstein files. Okay. So he lets that go, but they passed the government funding option, and they've caved to Democrats. Again, Donald Trump may sign it because it'll make him look better if he signs it, but he'll think he looked a little weak because they caved to Democrats, even though Donald Trump himself was not part of any negotiation. So same situation. Now we funded the government's open. But Donald Trump is pissed that Mike Johnson caved to Democrats. So he calls up maybe the exact same representative he would call about the Epstein files. Says, hey, get rid of him. It would take only 4 or 5 Republicans and all Democrats, and Mike Johnson's out as Speaker. Okay. But then there could be the fact that, depending on what's going on, Donald Trump may just say, hey, let's get rid of Mike Johnson as Speaker of the House anyway, before they've opened the government back up. Because right now he is able to do pretty much whatever he wants to do. The committees he needs to talk to, the planning groups he needs to talk to do things like tearing down the East Wing of the White House are gone. And since he's just doing whatever he wants, maybe he wants to keep the government shut down, despite saying that, they want an end to it. He wants to fund all these programs. The longer he can keep it shut down, the more he can do whatever he wants, and he doesn't have to answer to Congress for anything. So maybe they try to oust Mike Johnson to delay things and keep the government shut down for a while. So what happens? Well, this is where Democrats could play a strong card and said, okay, Mike Johnson, you make sure we have the votes to fund the government at XYZ levels. Here's the cards, basically whatever the Senate passes or maybe something different. But they come up with terms and said, okay, we will save your job if you fund the government with our demands met. And Mike Johnson would probably, by wanting to stay Speaker of the House, go through and do that. I know Kevin McCarthy had done that a couple of times. The Democrats had saved Kevin McCarthy at least once when they voted to oust him in exchange for something the Democrats wanted during his tenure as Speaker of the House. So that's another option. But then you also have the fact that Marjorie Taylor Greene is going to be calling for a vote to remove Speaker of the House Mike Johnson. Well, gee, he may go not because of something he did to piss off Donald Trump, but because of something he is pissing off his own party for. And again, it would depend on where they're at with the government shutdown fight and what's going on there as to whether or not the Democrats save Mike Johnson. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. It would depend if they can use Mike Johnson to actually fund the government and get some of their priorities met. And if they can get their priorities met, maybe they save him. If they've already funded the government and they don't need him, he has given them no reason to save him as far as being Speaker of the House. Especially with what he is doing right now with keeping the House out of session, etc. There's no reason for them to come up and protect him. So what could he could be out as Speaker as early as next week, maybe, if they funded the government. Democrats hold a lot of power over Mike Johnson as far as being Speaker, and he doesn't even realize it yet. All right. Now, one of the things why we know Republicans are scared about what is going to happen in the midterms, this last election on an off-year election scared the hell out of Republicans. Now, how do we know that? Well, look at what people like Steve Bannon are saying. Steve Bannon was at a meeting of Republicans here recently, and he basically said after the election that they need to do everything in their power, that their sole mission should be to win as many seats as they can and hold the House and the Senate in 26 and 28. And if they don't, they could end up in prison. That there were going to be people in the room he was talking to that would go to prison. Now, Steve Bannon had gone to prison before for lying, not for lying, for failing to answer a government subpoena, a congressional subpoena. And I believe Donald Trump had actually given him a pardon. But doesn't matter. Thing is, Steve Bannon's right. They could end up going to prison, but what is he worried about? Well, a couple things. If the Democrats take over in 26 and they have momentum going forward, it would help propel them into 28 to win. If they win in 28, where they have a Democratic president, a decent attorney general, not a Merrick Garland, somebody who's willing to say, well, no, this isn't just a political issue. We need to go after actual criminals here because there's criminality in some of the things they are doing. With the way ICE is going, with the destruction of the East Wing, with just a lot of things this administration was doing, that there are problems with the way things are being handled, that they need to turn around and say, okay, these people are criminals and we need to deal with it. So he's worried about that. But why is he worried about losing the midterms and potentially being held criminally liable? Well, because of a couple things. One, if the Democrats hold one or both chambers of Congress after the midterms, there is going to be congressional investigations. Okay? Those things are going to happen. And things are going to be brought to light. Remember how much we found out about January 6th, about the planning of it, about the staging, about all of it, thanks to the J6 Select Committee. And those things are going to come to light thanks to congressional investigations by Democrats if they hold one or both chambers of Congress after the midterms. And that could affect how Republicans do in the 2028 general election. If there's a large outcry for these people to be held accountable and face criminal prosecution, that could set up a Democrat potentially winning. Now, I think a Democrat's going to win anyway because of everything going on. You have Donald Trump wrecking the economy. Everything's going to shit. And all of the things that this administration is doing that nobody thought was going to get this bad this fast. I really thought there was going to be some congressional guardrails, that they weren't going to let him do all of these things, and then say, hey, wait a minute, we could always remove you. I thought they were just using him to get themselves elected, and that they would kind of keep him on a shorter rope, and they haven't yet. Well, when these decisions come forward and we find out what's all going on with the midterms, it could lead to Republicans losing even bigger than they might have without any of that coming forward, going into the general election. Then again, leading into criminal investigations and actual charges when we have a decent attorney general. Because remember, Merrick Garland didn't assign Jack Smith to look into any of Donald Trump's criminal behavior from January 6th until after public outcry because of the J6 Select Committee. And when that all happened, then they came forward and people were mad and everything. He's like, okay, well, maybe I should assign a special prosecutor. So then we got a special prosecutor, and within 10 months, they had charges filed and they had cases going to court. If you would have done that right off the bat, well, we wouldn't be dealing with Donald Trump now. And there probably would have been sitting members of Congress that would have been charged then, that we're now still dealing with. Now, ultimately, what happens with this, Steve Bannon is saying that they could be facing criminal prosecution. The other thing coming out of it is, as they are looking at everything, okay, you have them doing these a select committee or something. They're doing all these investigations. Okay, sure. Pam Bondi's the attorney general right now. She controls the DOJ, and they're not going to be charging anybody in this administration with a crime. Just not going to happen. Donald Trump wouldn't allow it. So you think they would get a pass. Here's the problem. Depending on what comes out from these investigations from democratically led committees, if they take the House and the Senate, like I think they could, it could end up being a situation where maybe there were some state laws that were broken, or they point some state investigators in the right direction to open their own investigations. And suddenly you are dealing with state level charges, especially when it comes to ICE and how ICE is operating in their jurisdictions and willingly breaking the law, etc. You have a government agency who doesn't seem to care about giving people their due process, their legal constitutional rights. And I can already hear the MAGAs in the comments saying, well, undocumented immigrants don't deserve due process. But you people are dumber than a box of rocks, because how do you determine if somebody is an undocumented illegal immigrant? If you don't give them an opportunity to defend themselves before an impartial judge and show that they are a citizen, maybe they're not, maybe they have a green card or not. Who knows? But how do you know until they have a chance to defend themselves and answer for the charge of being here illegally? That is what due process is. I think some of them actually believe due process isn't some kind of a thing when it comes to the legal system. They might think maybe it's some kind of a bank account they get access to, something like that. I don't know. Some of these people are not the brightest when it comes to what they believe. But ultimately, I think if there are federal, congressional hearings into what is going on with this administration, it could lead to state charges. And maybe Steve Bannon is worried about that when it comes to losing the midterms. He's also probably worried about, all of it coming to light and public opinion really turning against the Republican Party going into the 2028 general election. Now, no matter what they say, Donald Trump is not going to be on the ballot in 2028. He won't be. Donald Trump kind of said after these losses, well, that they lost because he wasn't on the ballot. And that in his mind, that he is the only one who can win for the Republicans. And Some people have floated this idea that they need to modify the Constitution or just let it be so he can run again. Well, they don't have the votes to change the Constitution. They don't even have the votes right now to open the government, let alone change the Constitution. Democrats aren't going to side with that, especially in some kind of a way that only favors Donald Trump. One of the constitutional amendments they had floated out was this idea that if you win a term and then get voted out and come back and win another term, you could run for a third term. So you would get one term, a second non-consecutive, and then a third that would be consecutive to the first, adding basically a one-time exception. Well, the only person that would currently apply to is Donald Trump, unless you could find a way to somehow reanimate Grover Cleveland, because we've only ever had two people ever hold non-consecutive presidential terms. Typically, when you lose, you're done in politics. They don't bring you back. But see, Republicans are out of ideas. They don't have any good politicians. Donald Trump has chased most of them out of the party. So they brought Donald Trump back. He ran. He won. And now they are talking about floating this idea of changing the Constitution. Well, I don't think that's going to happen. They don't have the votes to make that happen. Okay. So then Donald Trump says, well, I'm going to be on the ballot. Well, you can't just run for a third term. The 22nd Amendment is rather clear. It says no person can be elected president more than once, or more than twice, rather. Okay. So then what about him running as somebody's VP? Well, there are two problems with that. Even if you are somebody's VP who ascends to being the president, you can only be a maximum of 10 years can you be president. Okay. So Donald Trump would only have 2 years max if that were to work. But here's the problem. What they're suggesting is Donald Trump would run with J.D. Vance and be J.D. Vance's VP, and then J.D. Vance would resign, and Donald Trump would become president. Well, even if that were to happen, Donald Trump would only be eligible to be president for 2 years. But there is also another situation. The 12th Amendment says if you are ineligible to run for president, you are ineligible to run for the vice presidency. So he couldn't run because he would be ineligible to serve all 4 years of the presidency as J.D. Vance's VP. He wouldn't be eligible. Now, nobody's ever challenged this because nobody was dumb enough to challenge it before. But those two amendments look like they block him completely. The only other option they would have is also so far-fetched it's dumb, and that would be in 2028, assuming Republicans have control of the House of Representatives, that they select Donald Trump to be the Speaker of the House, and then assuming J.D. Vance and whoever he has as a running mate, maybe Marco Rubio, both resign immediately upon taking the oath of office, and Donald Trump would be automatically the president because there was a vacancy. Again, he would only have 2 years, but that has never happened. They have never selected a non-member to be Speaker of the House, not in over 200 years. It just doesn't happen at all. So there's no chance Donald Trump is going to be on the ballot. There's no chance he's going to come back as president once he's done. And that's if he's even healthy enough to make it. He continues to look like he is getting worse day by day. He has more and more moments where they ask him a question. If he doesn't have an answer, have you noticed? He's been deflecting more lately to other people. He defers to J.D. Vance. He'll defer to Pam Bondi. He makes it look like he is, passing it off to an expert to let them handle it. But that's not who Donald Trump is. He's never been that way. He doesn't think people know more than he does. Have you ever listened to him speak? According to him, he's the smartest person in the room. But he's been doing that more. He's been deflecting more, letting other people talk for him. You have his ankle issues where they're swollen. You have him, wandering, like when he was wandering in Asia with when he was supposed to be walking side by side with the Prime Minister of Japan and doing a specific ceremony, he kind of just wandered off, had this lost look at his face. You know, you had the um, issue just a couple days ago in the Oval Office where there was the medical emergency where where they fainted or whatever happened. They ended up on the ground. He kind of didn't overly look concerned, just looked to see what was going on. Then he just kind of stood there with this blank, vacant look in his eye, like he didn't know what to do next. Now, I wasn't expecting him to jump in and help and perform CPR or do any of those things. But the fact that he just looked so lost, like you had just killed his routine because, you know, they can probably get him through certain things by saying, okay, you're going to go out, you're going to talk to the press about this, here are your talking points, and they've been propping him up. And when something unexpected happens, there's a short in the system now. He can't just go with it anymore. It's becoming very obvious there are issues with him. I don't know that he makes it to 2029. I mean, if you listen to the Rational Boomer podcast, our friend and fellow guest over there, Ed, he thinks that Donald Trump isn't going to make it to Thanksgiving of this year. Other people are saying he won't make it to Christmas. I'm not sure when he's going to make it to. I did float the idea over on the Rational Boomer podcast that he may not see his 80th birthday. It's entirely possible. He's not looking good, and it's only going to get worse. They're not going to be able to prop him up forever. So Republicans need to figure out what they're doing here. Donald Trump's not going to be around forever to protect them, and he's also not going to be around forever to punish them when they don't do his will. They are going to have to start cracking from him and doing their own thing. You already see parts of it happen. Senate Republicans saying we're not getting rid of the filibuster because we want to use it when we're in the minority, because they have the foresight to see beyond right now. You have Marjorie Taylor Greene saying, hey, we got to do something about these Affordable Care Act premiums. She's sounding almost reasonable. And the more cracks that show, the more it's going to be evident that Donald Trump is losing his grip on the Republican Party. And I think the closer we get to primaries, the closer we get to the midterms, the more those cracks are going to show. And we already have a bunch of people who are not seeking re-election from both parties, but specifically Republicans. They have nothing to lose by breaking from Donald Trump. And if you have other people in Congress that are potentially primaried out, because like you hear James Corman in Texas, he's facing a primary challenger with Ken Paxton. Now, on the off chance Ken Paxton ends up winning that primary, James Corman in the Senate has nothing to lose by breaking from Donald Trump for the rest of his term, however short that would be at that point. You know, I don't know specifically when the Texas primary is, but then they would have no reason if they're not going to be up for re-election because they've got primaried out or whatever, or they have they've decided to retire and not seek re-election. They have less reason to protect Donald Trump because he can't affect them really in the private sector, not to the level that he potentially could by affecting whether or not they get reelected. Okay, so that's going to do it for the Analytical Iowan podcast. I'll be back tomorrow with even more to talk about. We may have a breakthrough because the Senate is still in town. They are actually working through the weekend, I think, for the first time since the government actually got shut down. And as this goes on, I'll just continue to bring my analysis through and talk to you about what I see going on. But don't forget to also check me out tomorrow on the Rational Boomer podcast, where I am a guest. I actually recorded that on Friday night. So if some things have changed between now and tomorrow, I guess you'll know more than I did when I recorded the podcast. But encourage you to check it out over on the Rational Boomer, where I guest starred tomorrow. And at some point, I will probably have Mike the Rational Boomer here as a guest appearance on this show as well. Just got to figure out when I want to start doing that and making sure I can make it all fit into my schedule as I get everything going with the podcast. But I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. I hope you have a good day. We'll be back tomorrow with even more because there's always something to talk about.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.